Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov chaired a meeting of the UN Security Council on Monday amidst deep divisions surfacing with the United Nations Secretary General. Right at that meeting, the odd neighborhood within the Security Council arose because Russia holds the rotating presidency of the Security Council for the month of April. Fundamental differences were to the fore immediately at this meeting. Russia, of course, sees itself as the voice of an alternative world order together with China against the influence of the US, NATO, and what are broadly clubbed as Western powers. And those others see the Russian presidency itself as an instance of the failure of the UN system in which a supposed custodian of the world order has turned aggressor against a neighbor country. Seated right next to Lavrov, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the Russian invasion of Ukraine had brought massive suffering and devastation.
We face unprecedented and interlocking crises, but the multilateral system is under greater strain than at any time since the creation of the United Nations. Tensions between major powers are at an historic high. So are the risks of conflict through misadventure or miscalculation. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, in violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, is causing massive suffering and devastation to the country and its people, and adding to the global economic dislocation triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic.
In some sense, Lavrov seemed to agree over the extent of the crisis. He said the world has become a more dangerous place now, and that the dangerous threshold now matches and surpasses that of the Cold War. He said the situation has worsened because nobody is allowed to Western power and the Western minorities to speak for all of humankind.
In order to halt the war that was unleashed in the east of Ukraine, multilateral efforts were undertaken for the advancement of a peaceful settlement. These were enshrined in Security Council resolution, which unanimously approved the Minsk agreements. These Minsk agreements were trampled upon by Kyiv and its Western handlers, who themselves recently cynically and even with pride recognized that they never intended to implement this. They simply wanted to gain time to funnel weapons into Ukraine against Russia. In this way, there was a public proclamation of a violation of multilateralism, a multilateral obligation of all members of the United Nations, which is enshrined in the Charter, which requires that all members comply with the resolutions of the Security Council. Our subsequent action to prevent confrontation, including President Putin's proposal dating December 2021 for the agreement to be reached on multilateral mutual security guarantees, were high-handedly rejected. Nobody, we were told, can prevent NATO from embracing Ukraine.
Our hypocritical convener today, Russia, invaded its neighbor, Ukraine, and struck at the heart of the UN Charter and all the values we hold dear.
There was no agreement, of course, between the two who was responsible for this crisis that both agreed was a crisis. Russia was strongly attacked by the US and its allies at the meeting. The US ambassador called Russia a hypocritical convener who had violated the sacred convention against a war of aggression and territorial conquest. And that opposition, of course, was along expected lines. Unusual was the sight of the President of the United Nations Security Council speaking in conflict with the head of the United Nations at a UN meeting. The UN chief spoke clearly and emphatically along the lines of what Lavrov called the Western minority.
This illegal, unprovoked, and unnecessary war runs directly counter to our most shared principles, that a war of aggression and territorial conquest is never, ever acceptable. And as we sit here, that aggression continues. As we sit here, Russian forces continue to kill and injure civilians. As we sit here, Russian forces are destroying Ukraine's critical infrastructure.